Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. I want to let everybody know, first off, that we are on iTunes now. So for everybody that's been kind of hollering and griping and sending me nasty grams about, why aren't you on iTunes? Well, we're now on iTunes, so you can subscribe on iTunes. And, of course, as you know, I would really like to get up on the new and noteworthy. And everything that I've read about how you get on the new and noteworthy for the iTunes podcast really has to do with the number of downloads, obviously. But even more importantly, it has to do with the ratings and the reviews. So if you are one of the listeners that listens on iTunes, or you have now switched back from Spreaker back over to iTunes, which I think is fantastic, I would ask that you leave me a 5-star review. Who wants a 4-star? And don't leave me a 1-star. I want a 5-star review. And then if you can just take the time to write a short review about why you like the podcast or what you like about the podcast, that really fits into Apple's algorithms about what gets plugged or stamped as a new and noteworthy podcast. And that would really help with the downloads. And of course, you know me, it's just me. Mr. Competitive is trying to grow this podcast to as large an audience as I can. And I will be able to tell you somewhere down the road that we've got some plans in the works about how we're going to spread the word about the podcast, which I'm really excited about. But in the meantime, all of you who have been the initial loyal listeners that have followed me from the radio program over to the podcast, I got to tell you how much I appreciate that. Sometimes we don't take the time, we just don't, in all aspects of our lives, we don't take the time to really let other people know how much we appreciate things that they do for us. Even if it's just the person that gives you, now I don't go to Starbucks, but just like the person at, when I take the dogs to McDonald's for them to get a sausage biscuit, they've kind of gotten to know me and the dogs. And, just that eye contact and just saying thank you and a wink or a smile. Of course, you got to be careful in these days. If you wink at somebody, I suppose that could get you in trouble and you'd end up being the next Harvey Weinstein. But hey, what do I know? Anyway, I just wanted to express my gratitude for all of you who have followed me over from the radio program to the podcast, and you will be an integral part of helping me spread the word. When I look at the, and I know this is too much inside baseball, but it fascinates me because one of the things that I do when I look at the stats of the podcast is I look at the location of where people are listening. Now, there are infinitesimal numbers, which means there are a couple of people in Japan. There are a couple of people in Germany. There's a couple of people in Germany, France. There are a couple of people in these odd countries that are listening, but they're also, what I find fascinating, just like with the radio program, because we're now able to consume content regardless of where we live. If you still want to listen to your favorite radio program in, say, Seattle, Washington, but and because everybody's leaving Seattle, if you finally gotten the brains to move out of Los Angeles, that you know that you can still listen to your favorite radio station in Los Angeles or wherever because of modern technology and the way we're able to do things. I should probably sometime post on Facebook a picture of my home studio just to let you see the setup that I have. And what I've got to figure out to do is how am I going to get this set up now or replicate this setup at the undisclosed location, because obviously Memorial Day is coming up and boom, I'm out of here. I'm down to the undisclosed location to eat some great New Mexican food, to sit on the deck and watch the elk and watch the bear, the bear are surely out by now, and see what's going on down there. And so I will be doing the podcast for several days from the undisclosed location. So I've got to figure out a way, probably have to buy some equipment and replicate it down there, but we will get that done. So anyway, enough about that, right? Hollywood and Toto will be coming up pretty quick. Christian Toto is going to be coming in. He's got some great view clips. And of course, what's better than The View? Although, let me tease it just a little bit. We happen to agree with The View today. So we must be very near the end of civilization. Let me get to the first story. You know, and I don't know why. Well, I think I do know why. It used to be when I was on afternoon drive, I could not watch the evening news. So I couldn't watch, unless I time shifted, and I couldn't watch the networks to see what kind of biased reporting that they were doing, either by commission or omission. There are two ways to do biased reporting. It's by what you don't say and also by what you do say. And so I didn't get to watch it a lot. But now that I'm able to watch the evening news, which just raises my blood pressure, but I tend to watch CBS. And I think the reason I watch CBS, the CBS Evening News, is because that's pretty much what we watched when I was at home as a kid, as a child and as a teenager. My parents tended to watch Walter Cronkite, right? Everybody had to watch Walter Cronkite. And I think that has carried over into adulthood, which is fascinating when you think about those things that from your childhood you tend to carry over into adulthood. But don't get me off on that. I'm just talking about why I watch the CBS Evening News. But I also think the other reason I do is Lester Holt. Now, of course, when Brian Williams was the host of the NBC Nightly News, I didn't want to watch Brian because even though I did a lot of interviews with Brian over the course of my career, once it came to light that Brian was just lying. He was lying about, he was lying kind of like Hillary Clinton. Yeah, we tried to land and there was rocket fire and we were dodging bullets as we ran to safety. Well, apparently Brian Williams did a lot of that. And even though I think at times, to be objective, I thought Brian Williams was fair in his interviews with me, I also thought that Brian Williams was not so fair. So I kind of quit watching the NBC Nightly News. And then Lester Holt became the anchor of the NBC Nightly News. And so I watched Lester for a while. And I watched Lester for a while because I've been interviewed by Lester, I don't know, a half dozen times in my life. And I actually like Lester Holt. He is one of those individuals that if you put aside his politics, it's probably like people that you have in your circle of influence that you disagree with probably on 99% of everything politically or socially or culturally, but you still recognize that they're a decent human being and that they're actually willing to listen to your side of the story. Well, that was kind of the relationship that I had with Lester Holt. But for whatever reason, I've never watched, not never, but I just really have never been tuned into the ABC Evening News. And in fact, right now, unless it's a brain fart, I really don't even know who is the host of the ABC Evening News or what they call the ABC Evening News. I don't know. So anyway, I tend to watch CBS. And I don't watch CBS locally. That's another story for another time. But I do watch, because I think on Sundays, I love CBS Sunday Morning, their news magazine. And I know it's left of center. And I know that when they do interviews, and if you watch the interviews that get edited for their hour-and-a-half program, if you watch the full interviews, which they have on their CBS website, you'll watch those and you'll think to yourself, wow, why did you edit that out? Or why did you leave that in? So you just have to learn to be a discerning consumer of news and know that everybody comes from a particular point of view, which leads me to this story. There's been a lot of chaos over at CBS the last couple of years. It was announced last week that they had a new lineup of hosts that were going to take over CBS this morning. Now, I don't watch any of the morning shows, none of them. I don't watch Today, I don't watch CBS This Morning, and I don't watch Good Morning America. It's just too much drivel for me. Well, anyway, at CBS This Morning, Gayle King's going to stay, but somebody by the name of Tony Ducapel, I have no idea how to pronounce his name, and Anthony Mason are going to be added. Now, I really don't think that's going to bode well for the supposed objectivity of CBS this morning. And because I don't watch it, I don't know. But on Tuesday, Anthony Mason, who has filled in many times on CBS Sunday Morning, which is why I know the name, and I don't know him, but I know at least his appearances on CBS this morning. Well, he appeared on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and he said something that I want you to hear, because let's talk about a minute. How can anybody be a journalist? How can you be objective and fair and set aside everything that makes you what you are today? Before I play the bite, before I play the clip, I want you to think for a minute about all the influences in your life. You know, my grandparents, all four of them, were huge influences on my life. My parents were huge influences on my life. Tamara's parents were an influence on my life. My teachers. There are so many different people that are influences on your life. And then there are all of these experiences that you have that make up who you are. I mean, I know we have the genetic makeup and we have the environmental influences, and all of those things make up who we are. So I get that. But listen to Anthony Mason talk about how you've heard me say that I got involved in politics. I got involved in Republican politics because of my parents and some friends of my parents who in 1960 were campaigning for a guy who was the state chairman of the Oklahoma Republican Party, who was running for governor. 1960. And this guy by the name of Henry Bellman, who went on to become a United States Senator, served 2 terms in the U.S. Senate, came back to Oklahoma, ran for governor again. I think that was, gosh, don't hold me to this, but I want to say that was in the 1980s. But he was the first Republican governor of Oklahoma. And my parents and these friends of my parents, as they would drive on these farm to market roads to these small towns in the Oklahoma Panhandle, they took me along. Sometimes when my parents were with me and sometimes they weren't. But my job was, as soon-to-be Governor Bellman, the first Republican governor of Oklahoma, as he would walk the main streets of these little farm towns in the Oklahoma Panhandle, I would walk along with him. And I listened to everything that he said as he greeted people, voters, shook their hands, talked to them, listened to them. And my job as this 6-year-old kid was to hand that voter what's called a push card. You know, like a 3-fold, a tri-fold folder, flyer about Governor Bellman. Sometimes it would be just a single card about him and his positions. That was my job. But think of the influence that had on me. At 6 years old, kind of not really on the inside of a campaign, but on the periphery of a campaign. But here I am standing with this monster of a man, monster just because I'm 6 years old and he was probably 6 foot tall and, weighed 200 pounds. And he seemed like a big man to me as a 6-year-old boy. And then listening to all of that, of course that influenced me. And that it is a part of who I am today. Likewise, Anthony Mason, who is now one of the co-hosts of CBS This Morning, which is part of the news division of CBS, said this on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert.
I've loved campaigns since I was like 8. I literally got off a school bus when I was 8 years old and marched into LBJ headquarters and said I want to hand out leaflets. And
wow.
Yeah. And
at 8?
At 8. I don't know why. I can't explain that to you, but I did.
Wow.
I'm a weird kid.
Did you always want to be a reporter?
No, I thought I wanted to be in politics in the very beginning, and then everybody I worked for seemed to lose. So I was like, well, this is no fun.
I'm a jinx.
No, but then when you become a journalist, you get to cover a campaign, and if the candidate loses, it's fine.
Yeah. Yes, it's fine.
You know, it's like, you don't
sometimes.
Yeah.
Stephen.
Now,
I'm not saying that Anthony Mason, every time he's going to be doing a story or an interview on CBS this morning, that he's going to be biased. I don't know. I guess I'm going to have to watch. I'm going to have to find some clips of his interviews or his statements. But I played that because I thought that is a great example of how we don't understand, truthfully, how hard it is to be a journalist. Let me just say that in defense of journalism. If you really want to be a fair and objective journalist, you really have to set aside your beliefs and your feelings. And I'm not sure that we live in an age where people are either able or they're willing to do that. Because we become so, and I want to use the word bifurcated, but it's more than bifurcated. We have become so stovepiped. That's a great DC word. We've become so stovepiped so that we know that if we're watching Fox News, that we are generally going to get right of center opinion, and we're going to get a right of center narrative on the news. And we know that if we watch MSNBC or CNN, well, let's just put MSNBC to itself for a second, that you're going to get generally left of center reporting, left of center opinion. Then, you know, you've got CNN. Quite frankly, if you guys help me build this podcast up, I'll soon have, maybe soon have more listeners than CNN has viewers. Wouldn't that be a hoot? But you know, if you turn into CNN, you're going to get far left opinion. You're going to get radical, progressive, socialist opinion on CNN. Nobody hides it anymore. Or maybe that's not the way to put it. Nobody sets it aside anymore. Now, in defense of Anthony Mason, in response to a video tweet of those comments that you just heard, Mason actually replied and said that he also went on to volunteer for Republican Richard Nixon during his successful White House bid in 1968. He tweeted 2 days ago, and in 1968, I campaigned for Richard Nixon. I guess that's an attempt to say that he understands or sees both sides of the story. I don't know whether I believe that or whether it's true or not, but I just wanted you to think about as you listen to people. It's like as you listen to me, you know what you're going to get. You know that I'm right of center. You know that I'm conservative, probably more libertarian than I am even conservative. So you know what you get. But I'm not a journalist. I'm not out there trying to tell you, I do try to tell you, the facts of a story. But then I also tried to explain to you, maybe here's a different way to look at it, or here's something that they left out. So my job is to help you think, help you change your perspective. I don't pretend to be a journalist. So think about how hard it would be to actually be a fair and objective journalist. It would mean that you have to set aside any preconceived notions that you have about something. And the best example that I can think of, a personal example, is I may have told you, if you haven't heard the story, and if you have heard the story, I apologize, but I think it fits in here, that early in my legal career, I was appointed by a district judge as a court-appointed defense counsel to represent two young men that had brutally, two young men, when I say men, they were teenagers, who had brutally raped and ended up killing a she was either 12 or 13 years old. First-degree murder charges. Charged as adults. What was my job? My job was not to get them off. This really solidified for me what it meant to be a good lawyer. My job was not to get them off. My job was to ensure two things: that the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt that those two teenagers were guilty. And secondly, my job was to ensure that those two teenage defendants received a fair trial. And that solidified for me a situation where I had to set aside, because reviewing the evidence based on my interviews with the defendants, based on the evidence that the prosecution had, there was no doubt in my mind that these two dirtbags were guilty. But my job was to set aside my feelings about what they had done and to make sure that they had received a fair trial and to make sure that the prosecution proved to the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that they were guilty. They got a fair trial. The prosecution proved beyond a reasonable doubt that they were guilty of first-degree murder. And as far as I know, 30 years later, they're still sitting in a Oklahoma penitentiary. I think that's what I mean by a journalist has a difficult job. Set aside your beliefs, set aside your opinions, and just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. I don't know whether Anthony Mason
I've loved
can
campaigns since I was like 8. I literally got off a school bus when I was 8 years old and marched into LBJ headquarters and said I want to hand out leaflets. And
Wow.
yeah, and
At 8?
At 8. I don't know why. I can't explain that to you, but I did.
Wow.
I'm a weird kid.
Did you always want to be a reporter?
No, I thought I wanted to be in politics in the very beginning, and then everybody I worked for seemed to lose. So I was like, well, this is no fun.
I'm a jinx.
No, but then when you become a journalist, you get to cover a campaign, and if the candidate loses, it's fine.
Yeah. Yes, it's fine.
If the candidate, you get to cover a campaign. But I guess my question is, if you're covering the campaign, are you being objective about it? Alabama has passed an anti-abortion law that begins at the moment of conception, and there are no exceptions for rape or incest. Here's how the story is reported. Alabama's governor on Wednesday signed into law a measure to ban most abortions in the state, but the legislature's approval and the governor's signature did not immediately outlaw the procedure, and it is far from clear when or even if the measure will ultimately take effect. The bill that the Republican-controlled legislature overwhelmingly passed sought to prohibit abortions at every stage of pregnancy. It includes an exception for cases where a woman's health is at, quote, serious, close quote, risk. But lawmakers rejected a proposal to add exceptions for cases of rape or incest. Women who have abortions will not be prosecuted under the measure, but if the courts allow the law to stand, doctors could be charged with a felony and face up to 99 years in prison for performing the procedure. Abortion services will still be available in Alabama for the time being. At the earliest, the measure will take effect in 6 months. Now, let's be honest. Let's be objective here. During that 6 months, between the governor's signature on Wednesday and it taking effect in 6 months, this anti-abortion law will inevitably be enjoined by the courts, meaning somebody's going to file a challenge to it, and a federal court somewhere is going to issue a temporary restraining order. They'll hold a hearing and probably issue a permanent injunction against the law. The law is not intended to be a serious ban on abortion. Let's be honest about that. This law is intended to be a vehicle to challenge Roe versus Wade, and the case that upheld Roe versus Wade, Casey versus Planned Parenthood. Now, there once was a majority of justices. Most people don't realize this, but there was once a majority of justices ready to overturn Roe v. Wade. But then Justice Anthony Kennedy got cold feet, and he flipped his vote. So I doubt we'll ever see such a majority again, although I don't think anybody can tell the future. But the current group of justices looks to me like a set of incrementalists. They are uneager to upset the apple cart, but they're happy to chip away at abortion rights. This law does not chip away at abortion rights. It bludgeons them to death. So my guess is that a U.S. District Court judge will quickly put the law on hold. The 11th Circuit, which oversees Alabama, will uphold the decision, and the U.S. Supreme Court will not take the case. Now, I've been wrong, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think they're going to do it. And I think one of the reasons they won't do it is Justice Kagan, Justice Ginsburg, Justice Roberts, Justice Sotomayor will not agree to hear the petition for writ of cert. And one of the other judges will say, no, we're not going to hear this. I want to make one comment about Roe v. Wade. I think Roe v. Wade was decided on the wrong grounds. I think it is an incorrect legal decision. Nothing to do with abortion, but it's the wrong legal decision made on the wrong legal grounds. And then I want to say this about abortion. Even though I am personally opposed to abortion, I do not think it is a federal issue. I do not think it is a constitutional issue. I think it is a state law issue. And I think rather than upset the apple cart and overturn Roe v. Wade and have all of the cultural upheaval and the civil war that will cause, I think the federal judge, some federal judge in Alabama, will issue a restraining order and an injunction. It will go to the 11th Circuit where they will uphold that. That will go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they will refuse to hear the case, and the law will remain enjoined. But these are the kinds of battles that culturally we're going to face, and we might as well just gird our loins for these battles. So Mayor de Blasio has announced his candidacy for the 2020 Democratic primary, and he did it with a video that contains all the popular rhetoric and the buzzwords that all the lefties want to use. I want you to listen to this, and I want you to listen to it because it is a quintessentially perfect example of how far left this group of nominees are. How many are there? What, 1,200 now? Who knows? But listen closely to what I only grabbed a couple of minutes. It's like a 4-minute video, but I'm not going to do that to you. I want you to listen to what he wants to do. Think about his mindset and think about how if his mindset turned into public policy, what that would mean for you.
There's plenty of money in this world. There's plenty of money in this country. It's just in the wrong hands.
Oh, I'm sorry. It may take between now and Monday to get through this one soundbite. Oh, there's enough money in the world. There are riches all over the world. The problem is that money and those riches are in the wrong hands. So what Bill de Blasio wants to do is to make sure that it goes into the right hands. Let me shut up and let you listen.
There's plenty of money in this world. There's plenty of money in this country. It's just in the wrong hands.
Here in New York City, a place that is legendarily tough and big. and complicated. Good thing about New Yorkers is they look the same whether they're really pissed off at you or they like you. We built an agenda that puts working families first.
We had to fight all over the city, all over the state, to make sure that people got a decent wage.
We are raising the wage to $15 an hour. Waitresses and dishwashers and store clerks and people who work in small manufacturing firms, the backbone of New York City. You will have the legal guarantee for the first time of paid sick leave. This has never existed anywhere else in this country. Fully comprehensive, guaranteed health care. My wife, Charlene, and I
believe healthcare is a human right.
By the way, I do have to pause here. You are aware that his wife is a self-avowed communist, not a socialist. She's a self-avowed communist.
It has to be available for all. It has to be affordable, and it has to include mental health services.
Everything begins with being healthy, and there's no health without mental health.
Today we announce free, full day, high quality pre-K.
People come up.
Free pre-K for everybody. I'm sorry. Does it remind you of a governor in Colorado? Yeah. Who's paying for that? Who's paying for free pre-K? You see, it's not enough. We joke about cradle to grave. Well, really, it was just kind of like first grade to grave. But now we want to get them when they're, 2 or 3 years old. We want to get them in, preschool. So we're getting closer and closer to cradle to grave. Well, actually, I guess we have in Colorado because, if you're born in Colorado starting, I think, in 2020, you get $100 put into an account for your tuition costs when you finally reach the age to go to college. And of course, the tuition at that point would probably be $1 million a year or whatever, but I digress.
To Bill every day and thank him for making that possible. It makes a real difference in a child's life, makes a real difference in a family's life.
Doesn't matter if you live in a city or a rural area, a big state, a small state, doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. People in every part of this country feel stuck or even like they're going backwards. But the rich got richer.
I got to stop. He says that people in New York feel like they're going backwards. Remember yesterday's story on the podcast about a certain mayor who 3 or 4 years ago was going the wrong way on a one-way street. He was going backwards on Fifth Avenue in New York City and caused an accident. And then he hid the accident report. And only because somebody started digging around did it finally come to light that, he likes to drive backwards. Because that's what socialists and communists do. They don't, road signs, one-way signs, stoplights, they don't have to, they're the ruling elite. They don't have to comply with traffic laws.
I'm a New Yorker. I've known Trump's a bully for a long time. This is not news to me or anyone else here. And I know how to take him on.
When Donald Trump started separating families,
our message to the federal government is simple. Stop this broken, inhumane policy right now.
Wait a minute. When Trump started separating families, that was an Obama administration policy. Lies, lies, lies. It's kind of funny, too. If de Blasio wants to take on corporations, why doesn't he start in New York City? I bet that's not going to go over well. De Blasio wanted Amazon, the country's largest corporation, to build its headquarters in New York City. But then de Blasio backed off and threw a hissy fit when Amazon chose not to locate in New York City because of backlash from people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Let's look at the polling. A Quinnipiac poll in April showed that 76 of New York City voters don't want him to run for president. A March Quinnipiac poll found that only 24% of New York State voters approved of de Blasio, 49% don't even like him, And in New York City, where he's the mayor, only 36% of voters in New York City have a favorable opinion of Bill de Blasio. I cannot wait. I mean this, I'm as serious as a heart attack when I say this. I cannot wait for the debate season to start, because watching all of these yahoos start going after each other is going to be absolutely, absolutely wonderful. I'm always amazed every time any of these politicians start talking about how health care is a right. It's kind of interesting, because if health care is a right, and then we have to start paying for that, I'm not sure of any right that I have to pay for. To exercise my right of free speech, I don't have to pay for that. Well, I guess I have to pay for it. I don't have to pay for it if I want to go stand on my front porch or stand on the town square and give you my opinion. I don't have to pay for anything if I want to go, out somewhere and speak. I have to pay for all this equipment to do the podcast. But think about it. You don't have to pay to exercise a God-given natural right. Free speech, exercise of religion, peaceably to assemble, to petition your government, I guess you don't have to pay for the right to keep and bear arms. It's just that if you want to have arms that you have the right to keep and bear, you actually have to buy those arms or have them gifted to you by, a loyal listener of the podcast that thinks I should get all of their guns or something. You don't have to pay. You have to pay to exercise your right against self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment. You don't have to pay to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. But if health care is a right, somehow we all have to pay for that. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever when you say that health care is a right. But if we make health care a right, as whether it's Medicare for all or it's Obamacare or it's just whatever form of socialized or nationalized health care, nationalized medicine that you want to talk about, if you actually want to make health care a right, like everybody wants to point out, well, we have the most expensive health care in the world. Yes, and we have the best health care in the world too. When you have the best, it costs more. If you don't believe that we have the best health care in the world, all you have to do is to go to one of the major clinics. Go to MD Anderson in Houston. Go to the Mayo Clinic. Go to Johns Hopkins. And you'll find some of the wealthiest people from all over the world, people who have billions of dollars in wealth, who could afford to go anywhere. They come here. So yes, our health care is expensive. Expensive because it's the most innovative, the most technologically advanced, and the best health care in the world. I can't afford the best health care that this country has to offer. But I don't begrudge, nor am I envious of those who can. And if you say, well, Michael, you've never had to go to the hospital, so, that's easy for you to say. Oh, yes, I have. I've had to go. And quite frankly, I think I could have gotten better care than the care I got at the particular hospital I went to if I had had the ability to go to a larger, more advanced hospital than the hospital that I did go to. But what about this idea that somehow health care is a right and we need to be like all the other industrialized countries in the world? Do you remember Dr. Tom Coburn? Do you remember Senator Tom Coburn? He was a senator from Oklahoma, served a couple of terms. He retired from the Senate because he had prostate cancer or something. I think he was an OBGYN doctor in southeastern Oklahoma. I dealt with him a few times when I was there. He was there. He kind of came in as I was leaving. But I forget whether he was on Fox or CNN or somewhere where he was talking about the American healthcare system compared to those in other countries.
$150 billion in fraud in Medicare and Medicaid right now. And if you look at other government-run healthcare programs, just think Indian Health Service, poor quality. Yeah. Think VA Health Service, expensive and poor outcomes.
Bam. He's exactly right. Indian Health Service? I mean, I'd rather go to the hospital I went to rather than go to the Indian Health Services. And I'd certainly rather go to the hospital that I went to than go to the VA. We're going to have government-run medicine?
Right, with exceptions. Mm-hmm. So that isn't the answer. The answer, except everybody else rations throughout the rest of the world, they won't recognize that as a downside to it. So, you know, in a lot of countries, if you fall and break your hip at 75 years of age, you don't get it fixed. You know, You're over.
You're over. Just like Obama said. You know, your mother needs some sort of transplant. Your mother needs an operation, a hip operation or whatever. No, just give her a pill, manage her pain. She's done. Old people are done. And that's what we're going to get in this country if we don't pay any attention. If we let these people get by with what they want to get by with, yep, we're in big doo-doo. I've had this story for a couple of days, and I think it expresses what we all feel and know about, and I'm not sure whether it's American society, because even though, like, for example, in late March, April, Tamara and I went to Europe for 9 or 10 days, when you're actually just a tourist, you don't always necessarily recognize the strains and the stresses of everyday life of the people that you are amongst in a foreign country. So even though we might be in, Montenegro, or we might be in Croatia or somewhere, it doesn't necessarily mean that we experience the everyday stresses that people living there experience. But you think about the stresses that we experience in our society. I think congested roadways lead to road rage. I think that the absolute stress that it is to get on an airplane, and then even the stress once you are on the airplane. And I don't even care if you're flying first class or business class. I'm not telling you this to brag, but Tamara and I fly business class when we go to Europe. It's still stressful. Now, it's not as stressful as being back in steerage, but nonetheless, it's still stressful. Modern society is stressful, period. But I think sometimes we have created a situation where the way to deal with stress is to call the cops. I didn't get my fries. My fries are cold. You were running a special on Chicken McNuggets, but you ran out of that special. So you call 911. A man was thrown off a Southwest Airlines flight for a joke about, and you think I'm going to say bombing or hijacking or terrorism. A man was thrown off a Southwest Airlines flight for a joke about vodka. Apparently, the joke was directed at a surly crew member. As first reported by Fox 40, this unnamed passenger was escorted off the Wednesday flight from Sacramento to Austin for making a joke because there was a long delay that made the cabin and crew annoyed and restless. Well, if you think the cabin crew was annoyed and restless because they had to sit on the tarmac waiting for a part or whatever it was, how do you think those passengers felt? At least the crew and at least the FAs, the flight attendants, were able to get up and walk around, have a sip of Diet Coke, talk to each other. They weren't strapped into their seats, elbow to elbow, like a bunch of sardines in a can. Peter Uzlak and his wife sat on both sides of the unnamed passenger while the crew attended to a blinking light in the cockpit. Uzak, age 70, tells Yahoo Lifestyle, "We returned to the gate to wait for maintenance and to refuel, and then waited for clearance from air traffic control. In all, we were delayed by 3 to 4 hours. 3 to 4 hours. Yes, everybody was stressed. That's when a young flight attendant distributed water. Uzelac says the man seated next to him joked, quote, "Wow, I hope that's vodka because we've been sitting here for so long," close quote. According to Uzelac, the attendant replied brusquely, "Yep, it's vodka." And when she moved to another row, the man joked, "Hey, this isn't vodka." The Southwest employee returned to Uselac's row to confront the passenger that made the comment. But Uselac's wife spoke up. She said something like, "We're all tired here, and that's no way to speak to a passenger." They started arguing about it. Uzelac says that he tried filming, but his phone wasn't working right. The flight attendant walked to the front of the plane, made a phone call, and then suddenly the plane taxied back to the terminal after 3 or 4 hours. Once parked, 3 deputies from the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department walked on board. According to Uzelac, the flight attendant sat out her shift on the connecting flight to Los Angeles, but resumed her post on the Austin leg. When I walked off the plane, she stood next to the pilot and just smirked at me. Uzelac is right. There's no excuse for that. You can't do anything. And I think that we've become so accustomed to living in this highly regulated society where our every move can be, unbeknownst to us, offensive to somebody else. I joked at the beginning of the program, winking at somebody when they do something nice for you. I should retract that statement because it might get you in trouble. We've created a society where nothing can just be blown off. And I think that's really, really sad. Let me get a sip of Diet Coke. Hollywood and Toto coming up next. And as promised, it is Friday, and so now it's time for Hollywood and Toto. Christian Toto has shown up. Well, it's kind of weird. We do it by Skype now, but I kind of like this. I don't have to smell you or anything.
It's so much better this way.
It is. And you're actually in a green room. You have a green T-shirt on, and and it's like there's this green glow. It's like I don't know. What was that?
It's embarrassing. I've tried to fix this. This is on my Skype for some reason. When I record or in this video, there's a green glow around me. It's like a mid-Hulk transformation, but I can't fix it, and I'm not going to try because I'm exhausted.
Well, you do. You look like the Hulk, and I don't know if there's anything that can be done about it. But we've got actually a couple of great stories today.
We do.
I kind of teased it that The View. Now, I know a broken clock is correct twice a day, right? Mm-hmm. So every once in a while, The View is going to say something that we think makes sense.
Amazing but true.
So set it up. What's happened?
Well, they're talking about Senator Elizabeth Warren, who went on a rampage this week about Fox News. I won't be on Fox News. It's a hate merchant site, and it's terrible people, and it's the worst thing of the worst thing of the worst thing. And I'm thinking, wow, a lot of your colleagues just went on Fox News, and they were treated rather respectfully. And I think that's a bad play. But I also think that she's not rising in the polls at all, and she's got to make some sort of gesture. And I think this was her choice. And the View's reaction was interesting at first, but then I want to dig into why I think they say what they say, which, like you said, actually makes sense.
And I guess I would point out, too, as a setup to the clip we're about to hear, once again, Meghan McCain is prepared. Mm-hmm. And then it's watching Whoopi at the end, where she just kind of, bam, puts the nail on the head of the entire conversation. Mm. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Right, here we go.
It may be a minority opinion, but I think that it's being very dismissive of so many Americans for her not to go on Fox News. Fox News was the top basic cable network in April. It finished in 2018 as the most watched basic cable network for the third consecutive year among both primetime and total day viewers. I think there are a lot of real journalists there, like Chris Wallace, like Shep Smith. And I think if...
Okay, can I pause for just a moment?
Well, she said Chris Wallace, so you can let the Shep Smith go.
Well, and truthfully, it's actually both of them. I do think there's no question that both Chris Wallace and Shepard Smith lean to the left. But Chris Wallace, to his credit, and I talked about this at the beginning of today's podcast, he actually attempts to appear objective. I don't think Shepard Smith does that.
No, he doesn't strain a muscle doing that.
All right, I can resist.
If you want to be the president of the United States for everyone, then you need to speak to everyone.
I kind of agree. It's very short-sighted on her part for a few reasons. Number one, if you can even change one mind in a Republican household, that to me would be worth it for Elizabeth Warren. And by the way, but not if you're not going on Fox. You've got to go to spaces that are uncomfortable. Just let me finish really quick. And I will say, right now, the far left that are running are looking for people like AOC's endorsement. And she has said she's deciding between Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. I took this as a political move on Elizabeth Warren's part, trying to differentiate herself from Bernie Sanders so she can get those kind of endorsements. I think it's short-sighted. I think it'll work in a primary, but I agree with you. It's the United States of America. Every woman on this show goes into spaces we're uncomfortable with, and it's a...
I'm sorry. Every woman on this show goes into spaces they're uncomfortable with. Can you give me, and I know this is an unfair question because I didn't tell you ahead I was going to ask you, can you tell me one place that Joy Behar has gone that was an unsafe space for her?
I think her chair has a spring sticking out, and so it's unsafe for her. No, of course not. Listen, that's exactly what Meghan McCain does 5 times a week with The View.
Yes.
But I think she's being extremely disingenuous. I think there's a lot of disingenuous parts of this conversation because I think for all the kumbaya that you're hearing right now, there's a reason for it, and I think that they're pushing things in a different direction. And by the way, can you imagine any presidential candidate thinking, I need AOC, I need to kiss her ring? She is an absolute blithering idiot, and I don't use those terms loosely. I don't, if it's Kamala Harris, I think she's a bright woman. I just disagree with her. AOC is not remotely bright, and the fact that all these people have to kind of go to her and say, Miss Social Media Wonderkin, we need you, is pathetic.
Wow, Mr. Toto.
I've been holding that one in for a while.
Why don't you tell us how you really feel about
Alexandria I'm just warming up.
Ocasio-Cortez?
Listen, she's a lovely woman. I'm glad that someone who kind of rose up the ranks from bartender to where she is now. She is not a lucid person. Her thoughts are not clear. They're not rational, and she's absurd. And of course, the thing that she does best is display a very thin skin and be the victim. She's great. If there was a professional victim, I would hire her in a heartbeat. But there isn't a gig. So Congresswoman is the current gig, and she's not really well equipped for that.
All right, we're about to get to the coup de grace of the View clip. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
Hang on. Here we go.
Effective.
But you got to get through those primaries, Meghan.
I know, but you can't go so far left that you're not for everyone.
But Fox viewers will remember that.
Well, and you know what? If you can't face the Fox audience, you can't face the U.S. It's that simple. We'll be right back.
Oof. If you can't face the Fox audience, you can't face the United States.
Done.
What say you, sir?
Well, here's my thinking on this. If Senator Warren was leading in the polls or came in first, second, or maybe third in the variety of the Democratic polls, I don't think they talk about this, and I certainly don't think they bring up the arguments they're bringing up right now. I don't think they take her seriously as a candidate. I think many people have already written her off, as well as other people like de Blasio and Cory Booker. I think that they're also rans at this point. So they can be speaking truth to power and actually being eloquent in this case, because they don't think that they're going to hurt her. It's why I think for a while the late night shows were kind of hitting Biden a little bit. It's why they kind of tweaked Beto a little bit, because deep down they know that these people are flawed. And in the case of Biden, they just don't want a straight white male who's older in that position. So there's always a reason why the left will critique the left at this point in our culture. Back in the day, it might be legitimate, but now I think there are different reasons why. And I think if there was a person on the left who was high up in the polls and they loved him or her, they wouldn't touch that person.
And I also think, to add to what you said, Elizabeth Warren did not go on Fox News because she knew that would make news, and she's desperate to get back into the news cycle. So by creating this non-controversy controversy, by not going on to Fox News Channel, she's gotten more attention, quite frankly, than she would have if she had gone on Fox News, I think.
Yeah, quite possibly true. I mean, it's all about, listen, when there's about 300 people running for president, you have to get your name out there and try to at least kind of tweak the news cycle in your benefit. And it's hard. It's really hard. It's the clown card that they're dealing with right now. And listen, she's been running for weeks and weeks now. Nothing she has said or done has been profound or interesting or thought provoking. She's not a good candidate. And the whole Pocahontas thing is going to haunt her to the very end. And I think a lot of people realize that.
I think you're right. So do you want to, as long as we're just, look, I kind of think as long as you've kind of jumped in the mud and you're playing in the mud, you might as well stay in the mud. Like, why get out, shower, change clothes, and then get back in the mud again, right?
That's why I'm on your podcast.
Well, bingo. Exactly right. So you also sent me, apparently, Robert Francis O'Rourke went on The View.
I'm sorry. That's so funny.
Well, that's his name.
It is his name. I tell you, in an alternate universe, every late night show would be mocking him on a daily basis, if only for the wind energy generated by his arms. I mean, he is ridiculous. And wearing the same shirt every time?
And,
it's
and I'll tell you the other thing that fascinates me. If you watch, he has this gesture of the clenched fist with the thumb.
Yeah.
And that is nothing but an imitation of Robert F. Kennedy.
I was thinking Bob Dole, too. Didn't he do that sort of?
Well, but Bob did, because Bob from that on his right hand was paralyzed from his world injury. So he kept a pin. In fact, a picture of me and Bob Dole right back up there. You can see the pin. He kept a pin so that people wouldn't grab that hand because it was painful. So he still gestured with his right hand because that was he was naturally right-handed, but he couldn't use it, and he kept that pin. And you learn to shake Bob Dole's hand with your left hand, and his left hand. But if you watch any video clips of Bobby Kennedy, he had this gesture, and I'm telling you, Robert Francis O'Rourke, or known to you as Beto, or Butthead or something, I'm not sure. It looks exactly like Bobby Kennedy, and I think that's on purpose.
Oh, I don't think anything he does is not on purpose. He is the most inauthentic person I've seen in the political space in quite some time, and it's amazing that people thought he was the next Messiah. And it's really funny to watch the media turn on him. It's just a riot. I mean, they were building him up as this great hero, this figure based on nothing. And now all of a sudden, the media wave is, oh, he's peaked, he's past his prime. He didn't do anything. It's not even his fault. He just is who he is.
He didn't. You're right. He did nothing. He rode the wave of this media of he is. I mean, you lose to Ted Cruz in a race in which you raised, millions of dollars from outside people and outside interests, and you still lose. And somehow, because he did come close, we have to admit.
Yeah, very.
He came close, but nonetheless, he still lost. He was an unknown congressman prior to that from El Paso, and then rides this wave, and I mean the wave just totally crashed.
And now I think he's making it worse on The View.
He is making it worse. And I guess we should let everybody know that the subject matter, just so everybody knows, there was a piece that Vanity Fair did, one of these, I don't want to call it it is a fluff piece, but a personality piece.
Sure, fawning.
Yeah, where Vanity Fair will focus on somebody, put them on the cover, and then inside, because they're trying to sell magazines, right? And you sell magazines by putting something on the cover that goes to even somebody like me. What the hell are they saying about Robert Francis O'Rourke? So I either download the magazine or buy the magazine, and then I read it and I realize I just wasted, $4.95 or whatever it was. So it was a piece about him, and I think most celebrities, can I use that word? I think most celebrities would be ecstatic to be on the cover of Vanity Fair.
Oh, yeah. But he seems to have regrets about it.
If I could get you on Vanity Fair, you'd do it in a heartbeat, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah. I want that the photographer to make me look pretty.
Are you ready to listen
I'm
to
ready.
the evisceration of Robert Francis O'Rourke?
All right. Mr. O'Rourke, you've been a hot topic on the show.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Let me start this over.
Okay.
This is Meghan McCain, again, having done her homework. And I know people can't see it, but if you listen and imagine that Robert Francis O'Rourke is sitting, next to, I forget who he's sitting next to, Joy or Sonny or somebody. And Meghan, of course, is at the other end of the table, or at the end of the table. And she's got her notes, and it's like a cross-examination. It is like a hostile witness, and all he can do is sit there like a deer in the headlights. It was fascinating to watch. Here we go.
All right. Mr. O'Rourke, you've been a hot topic on the show. You did a Vanity Fair cover to announce your campaign, and you said you were, quote, born to be in it. You went across the country alone on a road trip after you lost your election, and you said you, quote, sometimes help raise your kids. These are things in my mind that a female candidate wouldn't be able to get away with. Do you think you can get away with more because you're a man? And do you have any regrets about launching on the cover of Vanity Fair?
Boom. All right.
Quick comment.
Yes.
Kind of I think there are some good points here that she makes, but it's not a conservative line of thinking, the whole male versus female. You're getting male privilege here, which I thought was an interesting way. But maybe that's just her being shrewd about her audience.
I would argue she's being shrewd about the audience, and I think she's also being shrewd in that she understands that, again, it goes back to my theory that you have to understand how your opposition thinks, whether that's a courtroom or a political cycle or anything else. And in this case, I think Meghan understands that they are liberal and they do think in terms of male versus female and vice versa. So she's playing to that audience and making him very uncomfortable in the process. Do you want to hear his answer?
I can't wait.
You're right. There are things that I have been privileged to do in my life that others cannot. And I think the more that I travel and listen to people and learn from them, the clearer that becomes to me. When women in this country are paid 80 cents on the dollar that a man makes, African-American women, 61 cents, Latinas, 53 cents. When you have 10 times the wealth in white America than you do in black America, when you have the largest prison population on the face of the planet, and it's disproportionately comprised of people of color, the systematic foundational discrimination that we have in this country in every aspect of life is something that I have not experienced in my lifetime. And I've had advantages that others could not enjoy. So being aware of that, and then doing everything in my power to help correct that, working with others, ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment, for example, so that it is beyond the shadow of a doubt that women will be treated equally in this country. Staring in the face the legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and continued suppression in our economy, in our democracy, in our system of justice, it's the only way that you begin the work of repair and stop visiting those injustices on the generations that follow. So, yes, we have our work cut out for us in this country. I have my work cut out for me to be a better person and ensure that I'm more mindful to the experiences that others have had, different than the experiences that I've had.
You regret the Vanity Fair cover?
Yes.
I have to stop this. Two things. One, he veered into his talking points rather abruptly. He didn't really kind of answer the question. And also, hey, Beto, if you really believe that, step the bleep down and let a person of color take over as the presidential nominee. You're too white. You're too male. Okay. I despise white liberals who just say, oh, my goodness, there's such privilege I have. Step down, quit your job, and do something. Because if you don't, it's all virtue signaling, and I don't believe a word of it.
I agree 1,000% with what you said, but I have to confess, I was impressed with his ability to immediately go into the talking points, and that just ran for almost a full minute of just boom, 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 talking points. And then the other thing I would say about it is, to your point, it really is pathetic. Is this what has happened to not just males, but females, that we have to apologize for everything? So if you happen to be married or you happen to be born into a rich family, you have to apologize for that. If you're born into a poor family, then somehow that makes you a victim. I mean, we've just, in society, the social justice warriors have pinned all of this guilt on everybody. Guilt and victimhood. That's America in 2 words, guilt and victimhood.
Yeah, it's the currency of our modern life. And by the way, if she had asked me that and I had lived Beto's life, I would say, you know what? My wife and I have discussed this long and hard. She knows the mission I'm on. She knows the work I'm trying to do. She knows what good I can do as a candidate. And even though I'm not home every day, and even though I can't be there as I wish I could with my kids, I call them every night. I check in with her. I do the very best I can to be a dad while I'm simultaneously pursuing this agenda, which I think will help the country. I think that would be a more honest answer, and that actually would answer the question, because he just kind of, like you said, veered off right away, didn't really address that. And then he could also say, hey, if the media would give women a harder time than men for doing this lifestyle, then that's the media's bias.
You're correct. That would have been the honest answer, but he's not going to do that because he is an empty vessel, and that's what he thinks he needs to say.
Yeah, and by the way, to his credit, AOC thinks the same way he thinks, but if she had went on that rant, it would have been this word salad jamboree. But at least what he said, even though I disagree with almost everything he said in a way, is coherent, and you can understand. I mean, it was clear, and kudos to him. I mean, it's a pretty low bar for a politician, but I thought it was well said, even though I disagree with the thrust of what he's saying.
Just because I enjoy what he had to say, there's about 20 seconds. This is like a 4.5-minute clip, but I cut it way down. But I do have about 20 seconds left. Can you take 20 more seconds just for the fun of it?
I can't wait.
All right, here we go.
Those mistakes? Would you say those are mistakes? Being on the cover of Vanity Fair?
Yeah, so Megan,
it looks elitist. What?
I think it reinforces that perception of privilege, and that headline that said I was born to be in this. In the article, was attempting to say that I felt that my calling was in public service. No one is born to be president of the United States of America, least of all me.
Least of all me.
Well, he's got that right. I just love how they basically he wants to be liked. So he's on this show and he takes all their questions and all their I'm trying to think of the right word, but he basically echoes what they're trying to make him say. Instead of saying, I'm a politician, Vanity Fair offered me the cover story. Oh, heck no. Of course I'm going to take that. I mean, just regretting that. It's ridiculous. I mean, he just seems wishy-washy. And Trump, for all his flaws, is not going to pull off an interview like this. Trump is who he is, but it's an oddly honest version of himself. Whereas this is, you don't know anything about this fellow.
And I can tell you, and while I was never on the cover of Vanity Fair, I don't think I was on the cover, but they did do an article on me, and I have to say that at least I think most people who know me know that I'm not an elitist, and I would say that even to this day, I'm proud that Vanity Fair reached out to me to do an article about me. And hey, am I going to apologize for it because it's Vanity Fair? No. I did an interview with Playboy magazine. And in fact, my mom, digging through stuff, found, because I think I've got a copy somewhere, but I kept it for the article, not for the picture. My mom found one because my dad passed away several years ago, and she's slowly, as parents tend to do, still going through stuff. She found a couple of them still in the plastic wrapper that my dad had bought.
My dad will top yours on this account. He said he used to read Playboy for the advertisements. He was a big watch fan. They always had like advertisements for like big, expensive watches. So that was his line of reasoning to me when we had a Playboy in the house. And by the way, the whole privilege thing, I would love to see a Beto or anyone of his ilk say, you know what? I have certain advantages. Does that mean I can't speak on the national stage? Does that mean that my words are less effective or more effective than anyone else? No. Listen to what I have to say. And if you agree, great. If not, let's debate it. Let's put this privilege stuff aside, because why do we have to kind of judge people based on what their earlier experiences were? If someone came from poverty and maybe rose to being a billionaire, he or she could be a horrible human being, but they're rich. Does that person have more weight than someone who was born rich and grew up to be a nice and decent person? I despise this whole conversation we're having, but it's out there.
So you are, just to make sure I understand, you're saying that it's more important to be a nice person than it is to be either rich or poor. Somebody once said something about you should be judged by, I think, the content of your character. There was
some racist. I don't know who that was.
Yeah, some racist guy said that somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is if Beto had these wonderful vision for the country, that would be good. And why should we punish him for maybe having an affluent upbringing or being white or having a wife who has got a lot of money? I mean, at the end of the day, if his ideas are rock solid, that should win the argument, and that should be a boon to society. And it shouldn't matter whether he was rich or poor or in between or had privilege or less privilege. It's just exhausting. And, what about people who had privilege and did nothing with it? It's such a weird conversation, and it's an odd way to judge where we're going as a society.
So you said you're right. So you sent me two other articles, and I want to go to this next one by my choice, because I'm one morning I'm reading the news, and I go through the Wall Street Journal, and then I click on Drudge, and I click on Complete Colorado, and a few other websites. And I see this headline, and here's the headline. Tell me if you recognize this headline. Will political correctness kill classic movies?
That rings a bell.
I don't know who wrote that headline, but that headline sucked me right in. And I'm reading through the article, and then Christian Toto wrote this?
He's the smelly guy. He used to be in my studio.
That's right. Now I keep him a Skype distance away.
I think you can still smell me a little bit. And by the way, kudos to The Hill for not only reaching out to me, but it was their idea. The kernel of the idea came from them. They reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to write on the subject? I'm like, oh, heck yeah, I'm in. And so, I appreciate them. And I'll tweak The Hill because I read a lot of their tweets, and they seem very liberally biased, but I give them credit for at least reaching out to me, inviting me, and basically running it as I wrote it with very, very little changes.
Well, it's a great story, and when I checked again this morning before we started, it had almost 10,000 shares on The Hill, and I'd say that's darn good. So congratulations. Do you want to briefly tell us about the story?
Well, the pitch to me was, are classic movies under fire in our PC culture? And I think they may have mentioned, I'm trying to think if they mentioned specifically the John Wayne situation, where a 1971 interview he gave to Playboy magazine, the great articles and advertisement magazine. And all of a sudden he was, brought up, what he said was racially insensitive. And maybe there's an airport in California named after him. Maybe that name should be stripped away. And it just the ball started rolling for me, because that's what we're doing now. Last year, Molly Ringwald, the star of all those great John Hughes movies, said, oh, those movies are offensive now. They're not really good in line with the Me Too era. And she seemed embarrassed by having starred in them. Meanwhile, they were made in the 80s. The culture was different then. And they brought a lot of joy to millions of people. And they made her a superstar, at least briefly. So it seemed kind of the lack of gratitude was jarring. But also, we're in an age now where we're tearing down statues. Things are going away. If Louis C.K. is exposed literally as doing terrible things to women of a sexual nature, not only does he lose his next gig, but his old TV specials get yanked off of streaming platforms. So in that culture, in that context, there's a very good chance that some classic movies might get, excised from the national conversation.
And I would make the argument that whether it's Blazing Saddles, which you mentioned in the article, or it's Louis C.K. or anybody else, regardless of what they did, the stuff in the past, if you start erasing that or tearing down the statues or anything else, that's the equivalent of book burning, in my opinion. And that takes away our history. And something like Blazing Saddles, which, again, I'm so glad you referenced it in the article because it's one of my all-time favorite movies. Because if you don't understand satire and sarcasm, you're not... In fact, it takes us... You need to be somewhat bright to understand satire and sarcasm. And if you understand it and you watch Blazing Saddles and understand how Mel Brooks is absolutely ridiculing racism and anti-Semitism, it is so freaking funny that it's laugh out loud funny.
And Brooks has been saying for the last several years now, you couldn't make that movie today. He's right. And yet, in order to make fun of racism, he had to traffic in some uncomfortable truths, and he had to use some language which is not really family-friendly. But he needed those tools to tell his story and to make us laugh and to make us think. And the fact that you couldn't make that movie today speaks volumes of our culture and the fact that we're at a loss. The fact that those kinds of tales don't get told anymore is not good for the culture. It's bad for the culture.
But let's not gloss over that. Not only can you not make those kinds of movies now, but there is a move afoot to eradicate that from our history, to eradicate that from our culture. And I truly do believe that is the equivalent of book burning, which really is an authoritarian method of getting control over society by not letting people know about their history. And that scares me as much as anything else. And then the last thing I'd ask, because I really do want people to read the story. I assume you've tweeted this out on your Twitter feed.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to Christian's Twitter feed, at Hollywood and Toto, is there a link on your website?
No, I may repost it in a week or so. I think when I write for The Hill, they allow me to reproduce it about 2 weeks later. So right now it lives at thehill.com. And but if you go to my Twitter page, I have linked it out. So
okay, and the title is "Will Political Correctness Kill Classic Movies?" And I think the answer seems to be.
Yeah, it's to be determined, but I wouldn't bet against it happening, and it's pretty scary.
Do you have time to stick around and tell me about this Harvard Lampoon story?
Yeah, I do, and the context and the history here is exactly what you need. So why don't you describe the basic situation, then I want to kind of give the critical backstory here.
So Anne Frank, this Dutch Jewish teenager, everybody, I mean, if you don't know who Anne Frank is, Holocaust victim. Her family was forced into hiding when the Nazis occupied the Netherlands. They were ultimately arrested. They were sent to a concentration camp. She died at the age of 15, but her diary survived. And the diary was survived, published as The Diary of a Young Girl, which was this instant classic. And Anne Frank is probably one of the Holocaust's most widely recognized victims. And her story of what her family went through is a horrific story of the Holocaust. The Harvard Lampoon is this, I forget, is it from the Harvard Press? I forget who they're tied to, but the Harvard Lampoon on a fairly regular basis takes something in pop culture, politics, just society that has kind of made the news for some reason, which I don't understand why Anne Frank all of a sudden gets lampooned. But they will take whatever it might be or whomever it might be, and they lampoon them. They make fun of them. And they made fun of Anne Frank. Seriously?
It's what they do, and they've been doing it since the 1970s. And this particular publication is famous for seeing a line and not just crossing it, but blowing their nose in the line, kicking the line, and maybe even dropping a number 2 on the line. It's what they do, and it's how they act, and it's all about pushing us into uncomfortable places to make us laugh and think.
In the story, they have a picture. They have superimposed a picture of Anne Frank on this voluptuous woman in a bikini, and the caption is, "Add this to your list of reasons the Holocaust sucked."
It's silly. It's goofy. And it's really dark. And that used to be okay.
I guess I don't know that. It's kind of like me and 9/11 truthers. You just can't cross that line with me. And I think because of all my Jewish friends and some of the stories of their families, mocking the Holocaust, even and this isn't really, I mean, I guess it's supposed to be satire, but as someone who really loves and appreciates satire, I don't really get this one because I don't think it's something that you can be satirical about.
Well, I mean, look at the producers. I mean, Mel Brooks' Springtime for Hitler.
Right.
He was essentially mocking Hitler. Listen, is this the greatest joke I've ever heard? Absolutely not. It's mediocre at best, but it's something unconventional. Let me
argue with you on this one. I think Mel Brooks and producers, he's mocking Hitler. Harvard Lampoon is mocking a victim. And I think that's where I draw the difference.
I don't think he's mocking the victim. I think it's just goofy. So the joke is that she would have grown up to be a beautiful, voluptuous woman, and by killing her at a very young age, that was another reason why the Holocaust was horrible. That's it, right?
Yeah.
It's not a great joke, but it's a joke. And I think part of comedy is you throw stuff at the wall and you see what sticks. You just do anything. You try to make a laugh. You try to be provocative. And I'm okay with that. And if you found it, and I mean, not even you specifically, but anyone found it tasteless, yeah, it is a completely tasteless joke. It's absolutely tasteless.
Right.
I mean, there's no definition that it's not tasteless.
Then we agree on that. And
yes.
And I have to admit that my taste for satire does have some limits, I guess.
But that's okay.
Is it?
Because you're not gonna storm the barricades. You're gonna say, I didn't like that joke. I thought it was tasteless and it kind of misses the mark, and then you move on with your day. But that's not what happened here.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on. You going to come back next week?
Yeah, I will. No, I want to, before we wrap, the Harvard Lampoon apologized for that. That's why I sent it to you.
Oh, I didn't. I totally missed the apology.
Yeah, they apologized for that. And that's what rubbed me the wrong way the most about it, because back in the day, they did Teddy Kennedy jokes. They did every kind of joke that was offensive and crazy, but they wouldn't apologize. They just kind of blazed forward and just said, that's not our style. But now they apologize, apologizing for jokes. This is not a new law, new legislation that could hurt someone.
That puts an entirely different perspective on it. I totally missed the apology because.
Oh, okay. That was the main reason I sent it to you.
Okay. Well, I told it, boom, right over my head. But I would say I 100% agree with you. A horrible joke. I didn't find it funny. I didn't find the satire funny, but the fact that they apologized for, because I wouldn't demand an apology. I would I would mock it. I would tell them I thought the joke sucked, that I thought it was distasteful, and I'd move on. I don't criticize their right or ability to do that, but you're right. Apologizing for it, man.
Yeah. To me, like if Kelly Ripa said it or a mainstream comedian, I would not be surprised by the apology because that's what everyone does. But when Lampoon apologizes, I thought, wow, that is like kind of just shoveling dirt on decades of we do what we want to do and we make no apologies. That was the way I read it.
No, I think you're right. Gosh, I hate to admit that you're right.
Hey, listen, I still smell, so you got that over me.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so you'll come back next week?
I guess.
Come on, you didn't get last week's check?
I did. It bounced around the room 14 times before it finally landed.
Well, I'm doing the best I can.
And listen, now that I do this with you on podcasting, my dog is right behind me. So this is beautiful.
Well, other than the fact we're just doing an audio podcast, I can't. Greta, I think because I'm talking loudly, Greta is like, am I in trouble or something? So she just kind of stays over in the corner.
Uh-oh. Someone's a bad dog trainer.
Horrible dog trainer. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. I'll talk to you next week. By the way, be sure to go to Christian's website, HollywoodandToto.com, and follow him on Twitter at HollywoodandToto. It's really actually worth your time, even though he does smell. I'll talk to you Friday. Take care. So I love doing Hollywood and Toto with Christian. And and I'm serious, you really should follow his website at hollywoodandtoto.com. So thanks for listening to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. As usual, be sure and go to the website, michaelbrowntoday.com, michaelbrowntoday.com. And while you're there, I would appreciate it if you would find those social media icons across the bottom. You can follow me on Facebook, like the Facebook page. We have an internal discussion group that you can ask to join. And if you're not a troll, I'll put you in that discussion group and we can have some fun in there. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram, subscribe to the YouTube page, youtube.com/Michael Brown Today. But you can find everything by simply going to the website, michaelbrowntoday.com. And then last but not least, I want to reiterate that we are now up on iTunes. And I'm real excited about that because that's a great distribution platform for us. So if you would subscribe to us on iTunes, you can just search for Michael Brown on the podcast and then hit the subscribe button. And then do me a favor, leave a 5-star review. I don't want no stinking 4, 3, or 1s. Well, please. I'd love a 5-star review if you feel if you feel comfortable doing that. And then I would appreciate it if you would leave a written review of the podcast. And I ask you to do that because iTunes algorithms kind of count the number of reviews and the high-star ratings that you get, and that helps you get up on the new and news and noteworthy podcasts. And, of course, because I'm so dang competitive, that's one of my objectives. So I'd appreciate you doing that. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Everybody have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you again on Monday.